The Carlos Correa saga looks like it's finally coming to an end with a surprising resolution. Correa and the Minnesota Twins, when all is said and done, agreeing to terms on a much different deal than the one that the Giants had originally agreed to with Correa and even the one that the Mets had agreed to with Correa. So we'll describe the whole situation, and should the Giants have tried to sign Correa at the terms that the Twins are reportedly getting him for. We'll get into that. And Brendan Belt, how about this, going to the Blue Jays next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes 3 days a week for now, actually, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, Carlos Correa, full circle back to the Minnesota Twins, coming out this morning that the Twins and Correa had agreed to this new deal, 6 years, $200 million, pending a physical. But reported by John Heyman that the major part of the physical has already been done. They've taken a look at the leg and the ankle. They understand what they're getting into, and the contract reflects that. I mean, the deal that Correa and the Giants originally agreed to was 13 years, $350 million. And then when the Giants backed out of that, the Mets and Correa agreed to terms on a 12-year, $315 million deal. And obviously that fell apart as well. And then we learned today that the Twins and Correa have agreed to 6 years, $200 million. And the way that this works is once this has been agreed to, the team, the Twins, has the right to finalize the deal pending the results of the physical. And so they obviously know what they're getting into. And so I would imagine that this gets done. Like, I would be very surprised if this ultimately doesn't get done. And so it's 6 years, $200 million. It's not like even payments of whatever that is, like $33 million a year. It's front loaded. And then there's an additional 4 years and $70 million available to Correa based on vesting options each and every year, where if he has 502 plate appearances in year 6, then a vesting option kicks in at $25 million for year 7. And then if he has 502 plate appearances in year 7, then a $20 million option kicks in for year 8, et cetera, up to a total of 10 years, $270 million. And so my initial reaction as it pertains to the Giants is that I wonder, should they have done something like this for Correa? And I wonder if they were involved in trying to make a deal like this, or did they simply not want to be involved whatsoever, given what they found with the ankle? Because clearly, that's the thing, is unfortunately, like, we live in a world where people are going to say that kind of thing, but when all is said and done, we don't know exactly what's going on with the leg and the ankle, and the Giants just might have determined it's just not worth it for this player. Like, they want to make that splash. They want the star. Obviously, they wanted him, right? They agreed with him to a $350 million deal, and something is so wrong with him potentially down the road. I think a lot of the concern seems to be that down the road there's going to be problems. And so essentially guaranteeing him only 6 years and $200 million, and then he only earns that next year one at a time by being healthy. Essentially 502 plate appearances is not like a full season, but it's close to it. It's, I don't know, 130 games or something, 120 games. So I don't know. It seems like a solid deal for the Twins, but it's impossible to know without having a doctor tell me exactly what their concerns are with the leg. And so, I mean, you can make the case, and I will, and I do, that if the small market Twins were willing to take this risk, it is somewhat surprising perhaps that the Giants, but also not just the Giants, we're hearing that the Mets Basically, what they did was offered him a guaranteed half of what they originally offered him. So 157.5 million over 6 years. And so what the Twins did was simply offer more guaranteed money. So I don't know if the Mets were offering the same kind of vesting options each and every year. I think that's a good deal for the Twins. You're guaranteeing these 6 years. And then each and every year after that, there's like kind of minimal risk, because if he has a year where he's not fully healthy, basically, they get to back out of the deal. And at that point, he'll be pretty much in his mid 30s. And so you can just kind of let him go. And I don't know. It's a disappointing end from the perspective of the Giants, but I'm not going to hold it against them that they didn't want to sign a player who's clearly like damaged goods when all is said and done. No offense to Correa, but obviously something super concerning to two big market teams in the Giants and the Mets. So it is surprising that the more small or mid-market team in the Twins was able to be the ones that got this past the finish line. So what do the Giants do? The other factor is that they've made a bunch of additions since the Correa deal fell apart. And so this could suggest that they do have some kind of budget, and that they couldn't take on another $35 million a year. Because if you look at what is Correa getting in year one of this deal, it's $36 million for 23, 24, and 2025. $36 million a year. The Giants, with their deal for Correa, it was $26.9 million per year. So adding $36 million per year, I guess the AAV here is, what did I say earlier? Like $33.3 million for the guaranteed portion of this deal. So you would add that to the Giants' luxury tax payroll, which takes into account the average annual value. And so right now, Giants' luxury tax payroll is an estimated $213.4 million. So if you add 33 million to that, you're at like 246 million, and the first luxury tax threshold is at 233 million. And so it's actually like more expensive than the reported numbers if you're the Giants, because they would be paying a tax on overages over that number. So it's a little bit complicated, but if the Giants were to offer the same deal, it's actually more expensive for them. And so that goes into the thinking. They don't operate like a team that just takes zero consideration into their payroll and into their budget. And so I want to talk more specifically actually about their payroll, because for years and years and years, like the past few years, the Giants have consistently been around $162 million. It's been pretty steady. And so that, unless it's just some kind of coincidence, it really did seem like there was, generally speaking, an objective to be at around 162 million. And then we look at 2023, and the Giants' projected payroll is about 192 million, 30 million north of that 162 million. But there is a reason why I believe that in reality, this number remains about 162 million, and that extra 30 million is coming from somewhere else. So we're going to explore that topic and get into Brandon Belt, after 12 seasons with the Giants, leaving and signing a deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. So all of that coming up in just a minute. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball to the MLB offseason. We've got it all at BetOnline. And if you love sports podcasts, which I hope you do, you can even find those at betonline.net as well. We're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. A lot of MLB offseason stuff we've talked about. If you've got a Correa bet out there, none of you listening probably took the Twins, but it looks like that's ultimately going to be the way it ends up going. Coming up soon, we're going to have over-unders. We'll certainly talk about the Giants. We'll even look at other teams and see if there are any opportunities we can maybe recommend taking the over or under there. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, as promised, I want to get into Brandon Belt signing a deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. We're going to pay tribute to Belt and his Giants career, the Belt Wars, all that. It's over. He leaves, and he's probably never coming back. So only Brandon Crawford remains. We'll get into that discussion. But first, I want to talk about the payroll situation. This has been something I've been meaning to talk about for quite a while, so we're going to finally get to it in a minute. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby, by the way, is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So the Giants' payroll is, like I said, an estimated $192 million, according to Roster Resource. To me, when I look at the way that they've put in these numbers, some of them are not correct because a lot of the deals the Giants have signed this offseason have been backloaded. And so they're paying less in 2023 than they are in 24 or 25 in some cases. And in Roster Resource, they're not always reflecting that. And so it's not exactly $192 million, I don't think, but it's in that range, $190-ish million as their 2023 payroll. And by the way, this includes estimates for arbitration-eligible players who have yet to have their salaries determined. It includes estimates for pre-arbitration players. And if you look at some other websites, like however they pronounce it, Spotrac, whatever that website is, I don't like that website nearly as much as Roster Resource because they're just looking at like guaranteed contracts and not arbitration and pre-arbitration. So that stuff counts and matters. And that's why we look at Roster Resource as a primary source here. But the big kind of, not controversy, but maybe it is kind of a controversy, is that yes, the Giants look like they're spending $30 million more this year on payroll than they did last year. But what gets suspicious, or what completely makes it not as genuine as you might think, is that there was this sale of MLB Advanced Media was bought out. The rest of its kind of shares in this company were bought out by Disney. They had already sold a bunch of it to Disney, and then Disney purchased the rest of it for, what was it, $900 million at some point recently. And so math on the fly can be hard, but 900 million divided by 30 teams is in fact 30 million per team. Every team is receiving $30 million from this sale this year. And so it's pretty easy to connect the dots here that perhaps, the fact that the Giants are exactly roughly, I say exactly and then roughly next to each other, but almost exactly 30 million more than they've been at that 160-ish million dollar number the last few years suggests to me that perhaps the only reason they're spending 30 million more this year is because they're receiving an additional $30 million from this sale of BAMTech Media, or whatever they officially call it. And so what's also interesting is that before the Correa deal fell apart, that Correa deal brought them to about $190 million. And so as soon as the Correa deal fell apart, they went out and quickly signed Michael Conforto and Taylor Rogers. Now they've added Luke Jackson. So, but even just Conforto and Rogers brought them, and they did that like 2 days after the Correa deal fell apart. It brought them to about that $190 million number. And so it suggests to me, until proven otherwise, unless they make some other kind of significant additions this offseason, and then we're going to have to see if they really kind of scale back to 160-ish million next year, like 2024. But to me, the fact that they're up 30 million versus last year simply is a product of getting an additional $30 million from the sale of BAMTech. And so, I don't know, like they continue to claim that there's no limit. They're not like setting a hard limit at a specific number, and that ownership is kind of open-minded. And look, if they had signed Correa, there clearly were some other needs. They had not yet at all addressed the bullpen, and they said they wanted 2 outfielders, and they only had signed Haniger. So I doubt that they would have just stopped with Correa. They still needed an outfielder. They still needed to address the bullpen. There's still other needs on this team, like infield defense, as we discussed yesterday. Perhaps a catcher. By the way, Austin Wynns was designated for assignment. I'm realizing we never talked about that. We'll get to that maybe later today when we talk about Belt. But I think that there's some wiggle room. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up as opposed to like 190 right now at closer to 100 at 200 when all is said and done. So, but anyway, it's just a little bit suspect, and it really paints a picture that they are trying to come in at about 160 million regularly, and that this extra 30 million from the sale of BAMTech and every team getting this $30 million windfall is the reason they're up 30 million. But when we look at like payrolls in general, just to give you an update on where do the Giants stand relative to the league, look, I've seen some kind of slanderous articles talking about how their offseason is a complete and utter disaster and on and on and on, saying that their payroll is more middle of the pack. Right now at 192 million, that is 12th according to Roster Resource. But when we start ranking teams and payrolls, I think it's a little bit not disingenuous, because I think people really are looking at that and believing that this is the number that should rile you up. But the fact is, there's a bunch of teams lumped together here, like under 200 million. So the Giants at 192 are 12th. But if they signed a player for $8 million to a 1-year deal, which is a very modest number, they would move up to number 8 on this list. And if they signed a player for $15 million, they would be number 7 on this list. And the Blue Jays just signing Belt moved up. So the Giants would have been 6 if, like, yesterday morning they had signed a player for $15 million, which is a reasonable number. It's not crazy at all. Then they would have been 6th in the game. So when you're all lumped together, the ranking itself doesn't really matter. I'm more interested in, like, what is the median. The mean is kind of thrown off by some of the extreme outliers. The Mets with a payroll that's $80 million more than anybody else. And then some teams at the bottom. A lot of people tell me the Giants act like a small market team, blah, blah, blah. The A's payroll is projected at $54 million, and the Giants are at almost $200 million. And so it's just not true. The Giants do not actually act like the A's. If anything, it's more of like mid-market behavior. But if you tell me they're acting like a small market team, I'm just going to write you off, because they're not. Almost a $200 million payroll is not a small market team. That's ludicrous. There are a bunch of teams below 100 million. Giants are essentially almost double that. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, I want to turn our attention to, I guess, the Austin Wynns DFA, but also Brandon Belt, who leaves the Giants after so long. His whole career here, which started in 2011. So we're going to pay tribute to Belt and talk about, like, the first base situation without him in the mix. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat, but don't want all of the fat and calories? You gotta try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat healthier this year. And if you're like me and you want to eat healthier, but you don't want to compromise taste, then I've got just the thing for you. You've gotta try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. They've seriously managed to do this. If you don't believe me, try it for yourself, and you will be a convert. I promise you. We're talking like candy bar flavors, just delicious, and yet they come in with healthy, amazing macros, just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, which is super low, and a whopping 17 grams of protein, super high, in a typical bar. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. And if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. Trust me, you can thank me later. All right, as promised, I want to discuss briefly the fact that the Giants DFA'd Austin Wynns, and the fact that Brandon Belt has signed a new deal with another team. Not only are these, especially with Belt, significant just because of what they've meant to the team, but it also signifies the Giants may have work to do at these positions. Because, let's just talk about Belt first. So he started his career with the Giants in 2011 and he has over 5,000 plate appearances with the team, over 1,300 games played, and, a polarizing subject for pretty much the entirety of his career. There was always a camp that thought he was no good, and then there was the camp that was right, saying he actually was pretty darn good. Career on base percentage of 356 kind of tells you not all you need to know, but that is a very healthy career on base percentage and also underrated power. The home runs, I think it's the viewpoint of average home runs and RBIs. The people who are focused on those numbers, you're not going to like Brandon Belt that much. But if you're focused on like OPS and weighted runs created plus and wins above replacement, you don't have to, bow down to the altar of wins above replacement to appreciate Belt. It's more like on base percentage is more important than batting average because I don't know, a walk is similar to a single. It's not quite as good because you're not advancing runners in the same way, but getting on base is better than making an out. I think we can all agree on that. So, yeah, and I mean, for much of his career, he was a very good defensive first baseman. If you look at, there's sometimes confusion, like people look at Fangraphs or whatever, and you see their little thing that says DEF, and you're going to see a bunch of negative numbers next to Belt. Doesn't mean he was bad defensively. It's part of that equation is that you get dinged for playing less premium positions defensively. And we all know, or most of us know, like being a first baseman just by nature is not as valuable as being a shortstop. So if you can like really hit and you're a good defensive shortstop, you're a superstar. Whereas if you can really hit and you're a good defensive first baseman, you're less of a superstar. You're still good, but it's harder. The bar is higher when you're a first baseman. So anyway, this is, if you look at like actually comparing him to other first basemen, he was often one of the best defensive first basemen in the game. And I mean, it doesn't take looking at numbers to know that. Just watching him play, the scoops, the throws, he was always super accurate with his throws, and just one of the more sound and solid defensive first baseman around for years and years and years. And injuries were a big part of his story, and they were certainly last year. In 2020 and 2021, he was an absolute monster offensively, seemed to really embrace the new coaching staff that embraced him, because I think the previous regime and coaching staff was more quote unquote old school, and this new one kind of understood what his strengths were and didn't criticize him for like taking a called third strike, because that's actually in the modern game, like they don't want you swinging at borderline pitches, even if you're taking a called third strike, because you're not going to do anything with that pitch anyway. And so the chance that it could be out of the zone, like it's not worth chasing. And so he really embraced that and seemed to thrive in 2020 and 2021. But then last year, the performance fell off and he continued to deal with injuries. And so the end result is that he goes to the Toronto Blue Jays. It's for like $9.3 million, I believe. And it's a one-year deal. Belt is going to turn 35 in April. And so I wish him absolutely nothing but the best. I always defended this guy. I know a lot of you did. Whether you loved him or didn't love him, whatever, he obviously meant a lot to this team, wins 2 rings with this team, was, the starting first baseman on 2 World Series winning teams. Some heroic playoff moments, right? The home run against the Nationals in the 18th inning. So nothing but the best to Belt. I know that he wants to keep playing. He had knee surgery that ended his season, but as it pertains to the Giants, they've got a different outlook at first base for the first time in over a decade. And it's not great. I mean, if you look at the projected kind of first base situation for the Giants, right now we're looking at J.D. Davis and Lamont Wade Jr., with obviously like Wilmer Flores a possibility as well, David Villar a possibility as well. But it's really unsettled, and I don't know defensively that I trust any of those guys very much at that position, and it might be a problem. And so I don't know. I'd like to see them address that position. They've also got a third baseman coming in Casey Schmidt, and then maybe that pushes a David Villar to first base. But like I said, if you put someone at first, it kind of makes them less valuable because they're not playing as important of a defensive position. And then suddenly the bar, you need to hit more in order to kind of survive at that position. So I don't love the way the first base looks for the Giants right now, but it is January 10th and there's still time to address it. I don't love the way the catcher position looks right now with just Joey Bart and then Rule 5 pick Blake Sable, who's never played a game in the major leagues, the only 2 catchers on the 40-man roster, and Bart had his own struggles. So I think there's a couple more positions infield defense, generally speaking, as well, that the Giants need to address. But otherwise, it's been a solid offseason with 7 major league signings. They've spread about $200 million around in terms of total commitments. And Correa is not part of it, it seems. So, yeah. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen, Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again at least one more time this week, but maybe more if more happens. So thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.